Sophia was 26, and her very identity was often overshadowed by the sheer volume of her hair. It was a sun-drenched, glorious cascade of blonde, wavy hair, a heavy, luxurious mantle that fell well past her shoulders, a waterfall of gold that drew the eye and demanded admiration, even when Sophia herself craved invisibility. This hair was both her greatest defense and her constant physical burden. Living alone in a quiet, cramped third-floor flat, her life was a study in chosen isolation. Her days were marked by solitary movements, minimal interactions, and the constant hum of her own thoughts. When the restless craving for a change, a tectonic shift in her mundane reality, struck, she turned to chaotic, desperate home chemistry. This process always began with the same ridiculous ritual: pulling on her cheap, clear, crackly plastic rain poncho, an oversized, crinkling shield that smelled faintly of cheap vinyl, in her small, poorly ventilated bathroom. Enclosed in that plastic shell, with her face framed by the transparent hood, she felt free to be messy, to be chaotic, experimenting wildly with dye boxes that promised drastic, immediate change. Lately, however, the weariness of the hair itself was evident. The magnificent length was structurally compromised. The lower third, especially, was parched, brittle, and deeply split. Every time she brushed it, she heard the tiny, crisp sound of breakage and saw the exhausted, fine pieces clinging to the brush. The thought of another 6 hours spent meticulously separating and applying dye filled her with dread. This time, the persistent voice in her head insisted she didn't just need a cut. She needed a change that was definitive, irreversible, and immediate. Something that would eliminate the problem, not just cover it up. Her work uniform was defined by one item: the imposing high-gloss red PVC apron. It was thick, heavy, and utterly impervious, strapped tightly and uncomfortably around her neck and waist. Under the cold, intense fluorescent lights of the kitchen, the red plastic gleamed, catching the condensation and making her feel encased in a heavy, humidifying shell. It was a stark, bold contrast to the flowing blonde she wore outside, a crimson uniform of pure labor and anonymity. It was during the final, dead-silent grind of the cleanup, around 1 a.m., that true exhaustion hit. She paused, leaning against the cold steel counter, and then dragged herself to the small, steamy staff bathroom. The mirror was constantly obscured by mist and grease splatter. She wiped a clear spot with the heel of her hand and saw the truth of her labor. The red PVC apron was tight and unforgiving, pulling at the back of her neck. Her shirt beneath was soaked with sweat and clinging unpleasantly to her skin. But it was her hair, her famous hair, that looked the worst. It was plastered to her scalp, tangled with the day's grime, and deeply matted where the stiff neck strap of the apron had rubbed mercilessly. The famed wave was gone, replaced by limp, greasy strands. It looked dull, stressed, and fundamentally wrong on her head. A deep, persistent knot of dissatisfaction solidified her decision. The hair was the enemy. It had to go. She craved a solution that was not a trim, but an execution. 2 afternoons later, Sophia was back on the street, her long blonde hair flowing freely as she navigated a busy high street. The weather was crisp, and the wind lifted and tangled her long, dry ends. Julian, a man in his early 40s, well-dressed in a pressed navy coat, approached her near a shop entrance. He radiated an air of contained urgency and unusual formality. "I apologize for the interruption," he began, his voice low and practiced. "I have a specific, urgent project. A statement I need to facilitate. An act of pure, uncompromising change. I will pay you 100 euros if you will come with me to a barbershop right now and let me shave your head." The proposal hit her with the force of an actual blow. Shave her head? The erasure of the one thing that defined her? The one thing everyone commented on? 100 euros was ridiculous, almost insulting, for the obliteration of years of growth. Yet, the sheer audacity of the word shave, the idea of complete, clean, radical freedom, triggered the same radical, impulsive hunger as her home dye urges, but amplified tenfold. She took a breath, letting the moment hang, testing the limit of his desire. She looked him straight in the eye, her own sense of self-preservation kicking in. This is the disposal of years of growth, Julian. This is a commitment. This is dramatic change, she countered, her voice surprisingly steady, considering the seismic shift happening in her stomach. I will do it for 300 euros. Julian's face softened in a look of profound relief, not shock or anger. He immediately pulled out a thick clip and counted out 3 crisp, new, 100-euro bills, pressing the slightly warm, immaculate money into her hand. Deal, he confirmed, a satisfied, relieved smile touching his lips. The barber is just around the corner. Let's go. She wasn't quite expecting this. The physical weight of the 300 euros in her palm felt sudden, heavy, and undeniably real. It was a ticket to pure, unburdened freedom, purchased on the spot. Panic warred with an overwhelming, chaotic sense of thrill. Julian led her to the Clipper's Edge, a timeless, old-fashioned barbershop where the air was thick with the comforting, heavy scents of talcum powder, oil, and old leather. The floor was covered in a fine layer of swept hair. George, the quiet, older barber, was informed of the arrangement and nodded, his movements slow and professional. Sophia was guided to the back, to the heavy, antique black old chair, a ceremonial throne of change with its polished chrome and worn velvet lining. As she sat down, the leather was cool against the back of her legs. The process began ritualistically, formalizing the drastic act. George approached first, unwrapping a fresh, white paper neck strip from its dispenser. He circled the thin, tissue-like paper around her throat, securing it tight. It felt thin and fragile, yet isolating, a symbolic boundary. Then came the green PVC barber cape. It was a heavy, cold, slick sheet of dark plastic, much denser and more serious than her flimsy rain poncho. George draped it over her shoulders, the plastic settling over her lap and covering the chair completely. The deep, glossy green was the perfect high-contrast pedestal for the magnificent blonde hair about to fall. The color felt serious, almost surgical. Julian, having paid for the act, assumed the role of the barber. He picked up the large, heavy clippers from the chrome tray. They vibrated powerfully in his hand, humming with a low, menacing promise of swift destruction. We'll start high and fast. Get the weight out, Julian murmured, leaning in close, his voice a low counterpoint to the powerful motor. He set the clippers to a medium guard, ensuring he broke the surface cleanly. Beat. The clippers struck the back of her neck, the cold metal teeth making sudden, jarring contact with her warm skin. The sound was an explosion in the quiet shop, vibrating loudly through the leather chair and into her skull. A thick, heavy rope of golden hair instantly severed. Sophia gasped, her reflection frozen. Her chest tightened with intense physical awkwardness, a moment of deep, visceral regret and vulnerability. What have I done? Julian didn't hesitate. He worked swiftly, pushing the clippers up and over the occipital bone. The heavy blonde hair was falling in thick, continuous ropes, collecting in enormous, magnificent piles onto the glossy green PVC cape, where it began to accumulate like golden snowdrifts around her. The initial shock began to melt away, replaced by a dawning, terrifying fascination. The sound, the BZZZT, BZZZT, BZZZT of the clippers sweeping across the curve of her head, became a hypnotic, relentless rhythm. After only 3 minutes, the clippers had crossed the crown, and her entire glorious mane was gone, replaced by a dark, soft helmet of uniform short hair. The weight, which she hadn't realized she carried, vanished. Julian paused, stepping back to remove the guard entirely. The clippers were now naked, size 0, their metal teeth ready for the ultimate, closest cut. The sound changed completely. It lost its heavy chewing quality and became a furious, aggressive, high-pitched zzz, the relentless sound of finality, of total erasure. He attacked the back of her head again, pressing the naked blade down to the root, moving against the grain. She felt the skin vibrate fiercely beneath the heat of the motor. A fierce, decisive release. A sudden, profound lightness and exposure overtook the awkwardness. He pushed hard against the contours of her skull, eradicating every shadow of the dark stubble. She felt the cool air instantly hitting the pale, soft skin that the hot clippers had just cleared, a profound, new sensory jolt that was exhilarating. The shape of her skull, hidden for 26 years, was emerging, perfect and smooth, like polished bone. She closed her eyes, letting the sound and the sensation wash over her. This was not just a haircut. It was an undoing. Julian stepped aside, and George took over for the absolute finish. George first used a soft brush to carefully sweep the fine gold dust and hair fragments from the cape and her neck. He then applied a thick, warm shaving foam to her entire scalp. The sensation of the creamy, hot lather on the raw, shorn skin was startling, intense, and deeply calming. George then produced the electric foil shaver. It emitted a lower, continuous, insistent sound, the sound of precise, ultimate smoothness. George worked with meticulous care, stretching the skin slightly at the neck, around the ears, and across the crown, ensuring every single shadow of hair, every micro-stubble, was annihilated. Her scalp emerged, perfectly smooth, pale, and gleaming under the shop lights, reflecting the ceiling fixtures like highly waxed marble. When the last of the foam was wiped away with a hot, damp towel, her scalp was tingling, radiating heat. Sophia reached up, her fingers tentatively touching the surface. The sensation was foreign, yet overwhelmingly pleasant. It was not skin. It was incredibly soft, like velvet or highly polished stone. The weight was gone. The burden was gone. Looking at her reflection, her raw, exposed face was alight with astonishment and pure joy. "How cool!" she exclaimed, the sound ringing through the quiet shop. It was the ultimate, unburdened change, bought for €300 and achieved in 30 minutes. Sophia walked out, the €300 safely in her pocket. The air was cold on her bare scalp, a continuous, refreshing reminder of her monumental choice, and the rest of her felt light, radically new, and utterly free. The next evening, Sophia returned to the copper spoon. She felt the immediate, collective pause in the kitchen as she walked through the doors. She paid no attention, walking straight to the staff room. She pulled on the heavy, slick red PVC apron, cinching it tight around her waist and neck. Today, the bold, scarlet red was not a symbol of drudgery. It was a powerful, glossy contrast to the smooth, pale topography of her exposed scalp. The apron now felt like the perfect, stark, crimson frame for her radical transformation, giving her a look of fierce, minimalist power. She ran into David, the head waiter, who, despite his usual composure, couldn't mask his shock. He stared at her bald head, then at the bold red apron. "Sophia. Wow, genuinely wow. You actually did it," he stammered, then regained his professional cool. "That's incredible. It completely changes your look. How cool," he managed, nodding respectfully. Later, Marcus, the sous chef, paused his frantic work near the dish pit, his expression one of immediate, unqualified approval. He leaned across the steam, wiping his brow. "Hey, queen of the dish pit," he grinned. "That is the boldest, most awesome move I've seen anyone pull here, period. It's perfect. You look completely transformed. It really makes your eyes, and that incredible apron, pop."